Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Guglielmo. Guglielmo is the co founder and current president of De Vulgare, a nonprofit organization which aims to raise awareness and knowledge on the many minoritized languages of Italy and beyond. Previously, he has been a special education needs teacher in London, and he has a background in history and archaeology. Benvenuto, Guglielmo, welcome. How are
Yeah,
you?
well, thank you for having me. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have this conversation with you today and to learn more about what you do and the languages that you speak. I like to start each episode with the same question, which is what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Okay, so we'll kick off right away because my first language is Italian. And so that's the language that my parents spoke to me. And at school, I learned English and Spanish. So these three are the languages I was educated in a way. I received education in, and I speak to a certain degree and so on. But I am what is called a passive speaker, one speaker that can understand, but is struggling to make the words of their mouth in two minoritized languages of Italy. So one is Piemontese, and the other one is a variety of Lombard, so Lombard.
So I'm really interested that you said passive speaker of those. So being a passive speaker of Piemontese, of Lombardo, what does that sound like to you, or what does that mean to you that you would use that distinction of being a passive speaker of those?
I think that first of all, it's not in a particular case. Mine is not that original, if it makes sense. In those two regions, in the northwest of Italy, I think that the majority of the people who know the language are actually passive speakers. Why? Because these languages have not been passed down, or they have not been deemed worth enough to be passed down to future generations because of their perceived lesser social status. Let's sum it up that way. What does it mean? It means that, for example, I can understand when I read a text and when I listen to the speakers speak the language, but it takes me time to process what I would like to say and to actually speak. And these may also be due to the reaction that I have received or people like me receive from active speakers, if it makes sense. So to 360 degrees speakers, because of course, these languages, they have not been deemed worthy to be transmitted, so worthy to be taught as
Mhm.
well. Of course, we tend to not have the patience or the perspective that we have for learners of other languages.
Mhm.
That is to say, for example, in English, at school, when we were like in English lessons, we would speak our very scholastic and childish English, of course, with little shame. Maybe there was shame, but very little. Whereas for these languages, it needs to be pitch perfect or nothing, basically. So there's
Wow.
a very high standard of perfection. So the intonation needs to be in a certain way, no hesitation, and so on.
Mm. Where are we encountering people who are 360-degree speakers of these languages? Are they scholars? Are they just people in the neighborhood? Where are we hearing it?
I would say both scholars and also people in the neighborhood, but I would say probably more in the neighborhoods, in certain parts for sure. I was reflecting about the location of the languages where you can find them, and I've recently moved back to Italy. I've moved back to Piedmont, so this is where I live now, and here you can hear it often when you go to any shop, to the farmers market, at church, outside the church. You can hear it in the streets of the little villages, maybe to a lesser degree in a big city like Turin, but you can hear it as well in Turin. You can find it written around, and some people do speak it there too. And more or less the same goes with Lombardy, but there again with a great variation because there might be a town where you can go maybe that Sunday you go around and you hear it a lot, and
Mhm.
maybe the same Sunday you go to another town and you don't hear it at all. This may change, of course, and this is my perspective. But of course, when I say that, I am highlighting a minority. So it's not that it will be the first language that you hear all around, but it's just to highlight that the language survives.
Okay. I asked that question because it's if you have people who are, let's say, criticizing you for the way that you're speaking the language and you're not fluent enough, you can't find your words fast enough. It surprises me that this would come from regular people that you run into in the shops and on the streets, and people who understand that by using this language, they're using a minoritized language, and people who I would think would understand that it's minoritized for a reason because not that many people speak it. So it's surprising to me that there would be such a stigma against people who can't hold a full conversation or can't fully express themselves fluidly in this language.
Yeah, it would be surprising too in as an outsider perspective.
Mhm,
But I guess there is a general tendency of being a perfectionist,
mm,
especially in Italy. But I would say in some areas of continental Europe too. Like people pride themselves a lot with being overly correct when speaking or when using a language. And there's like the general vibe that there is both for the speakers of these languages and both within the bubble of people who are passionate about these languages. They
mhm.
tend to be very perfectionist and activist. I think that's the word.
Okay, yeah.
So when it comes to these languages, and also there is no standard variety for Lombard and for Piemontese there is, but there are like variations, there are varieties of these languages. If you go to, let's say, another part of the region and you try to speak this language, but you are not too confident, or maybe your pronunciation is not that of that particular area, they immediately perceive you as a foreigner, basically. So as a foreigner of that area, of course. So as an outsider, that would be more of the correct word. So of course that affects as well the way that
Yeah.
these languages are used.
We're gonna have a lot to talk about.
Mm.
So you know how much I love Italian as a language. You know that I'm an eternal learner of Italian, and I love Italy, and I love Italy so much. What I think is interesting about Italy, one of the things I think is so interesting about Italy linguistically is how diverse it is. And I don't think a lot of people outside, especially in the US, I don't think that a lot of people appreciate or recognize that. And we look at Italian as this monolithic language and the language of the people of Italy, but we know, you and I know, and I hope our listeners know that's not the case necessarily. I would love it if you could give us a brief overview, an understanding basically of the differences and the similarities that we have between Piemontese and the standard Italian, or Lombardo and the standard Italian, what makes them distinct from one another?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'll try to sum it up. First of all, geographically, for these two languages, we are in the northwest of the country. Piemontese borders with southern France, whereas Lombard borders with Switzerland to the north, and it's in the middle of northern Italy. And also, I'm sure that your listeners would know, but Lombard is also spoken in Switzerland, in the so-called Italian speaking Switzerland.
Mhm.
And what are the main differences?
I'm going to open my map while you're talking so I can
Okay.
be in the same neighborhood as you.
Check. So the first difference that comes to my mind is that in both in Piemontese and in Lombardo, we use verbal pronouns. So how can I explain them easily? In the same way that in English, canonically, you cannot omit the pronoun when describing an action. For example, I do, he does, they are. In the same way, there are pronouns in Piemontese and in Lombard too that cannot be omitted. So, for example, in Italian, I am is io sono, and in Piemontese is mi I tu. So it's almost can be hard to perceive it, but there is like an I between me and sun. So the mi I sun. The I, you need to write it every time. You don't need to write me, but you need to write I. I think it's like in French, but I'm not proficient in French, but I think there is, and then you say the verb. And in Lombard, it changes a bit and it's mi a son. I'll say it again, sorry. Mi a son. And I had to say it again because the other main difference between, this is like more of a phonetic difference between the Western variety of Lombard and Italian is that in Milan, somehow around the 1700s, they developed nasal vowels like in French, but I think they have more than French. So there is an in, I think ni as well. Yeah, basically every vowel has a nasal vowel too when the vowel is before an N. That is a bit more maybe
Oh
complicated
my
than necessary,
God.
but it gave me the chance. My mistake gave me the chance to say this, and sometimes it's hard to do it properly. So this is what proficient speakers they know how to do, whereas I just sound funny probably. But hey, I'm learning how to speak this. And another example with these verbs is the you go. So tu vai in Italian and in Piemontese is ti it vas. So again, the verbal pronoun it, and in Lombard, so the pronoun in Lombard te. And I don't know if you could tell too, because
Mhm.
of my voice in general and because I'm speaking in English, but the A sound in Piemontese is not the same as Italian. So in Italian, we have the sort of very open A that I think it's quite known around the world as well, that we say our A's like very open. Whereas in Piemontese is the A sound of standard Southern English received pronunciation when they say words like bath or calm and that kind of back in the throat. A.
Yeah.
So that's the standard A. However, though, this sort of A sound is getting lost from the 1950s onwards, it's getting more Italianized. Another difference we can find with this other example, and in Piemontese, it's iom a parlo.
Iom a
So
parlo.
yes, and is both singular and plural. So that, yeah, I wanted to announce basically that the masculine, because then there is the difference. The masculine forms of plural nouns is the same mostly of the singular ones. There are exceptions. It depends if that's the general rule, but there are a few exceptions, like if the noun, the singular one ends with an L, then the plural is with a J that you read as E. If that
Hmm.
makes sense. Yeah, that is more like curiosities to look up. Uh, and whereas in Lombard, it's like irregular and the plural is omen. However, many words, and I would say the general rule again, is that for the masculine, the plural is the same as the singular. Whereas for the feminine, in Lombard, for example, donna is woman, donna in Italian, and the plural in Lombard will be don. So we take out a letter, the final vowel, and yeah, again, general rule that I can think of is this way. Whereas in Piemontese, it's closer to standard Italian because we change the final A or an E. For example, donna in Piemontese is fumna, and the plural is fumne.
It's a completely different word, too.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's very similar to Sicilian femmino.
Mm.
It's more like fumna and fumna, yes.
Oh, no.
Again, words that I can think of. Other differences that I wanted to say is that this probably would be the first one that standard Italian speaker, learner would notice is that in these two languages, we have two vowels that are not present whatsoever in Italian, but also Spanish, but they are in French and German and other languages around the world, I bet. The first one is the U and the second one is the O sound. So how they are written, again, this is a complicated story because there is no official standard for Lombard. But traditionally, I would say the U vowel represents the U sound, whereas in Piemontese, it's the diphthong EU represents E. Whereas in Lombard, they like to make it a bit more complicated. So I think it's O, E, U. All together makes the E sound.
Oh my gosh.
If it makes sense. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They like it a bit like that. Or different influences. Another difference, and then I don't know, maybe I'll think about others as we go. But another difference is that in both of these languages, but mostly in Lombard, that is to say that we have more in Lombard of these, we have phrasal verbs too. And unfortunately, it's not something that they teach us when we are struggling in school to learn about the many ways to use pu or take or other verbs
Mm-hmm.
in English. They
Yeah.
do not teach us like, hey, we have them here too. For example, the verb fa means fare, so to do, to make, and passu means to create, to build, to run, to create, but also to lie about something, to mislead. That's the correct word. Another one is which means to draw, to design something.
Okay.
Dentar means to think about something or to create again. And these verbs, they had an influence on the regional Italian we speak here, and then therefore to the standard Italian altogether. Because I would think about, for example, in Lombard, in standard Italian would be fare fuori, and that means to cancel or to nullify. This is how we use it, the created version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very used in Italian, especially in everyday conversation, but also I think in TV series as well, like about crime or police. They use that word a lot
Oh
too.
my God.
But there are many more. Yeah. So
This is really interesting because I'm looking at the map as you're talking. I'm looking at it on my phone. I'm not texting anybody. I just want you to know that. Lombardy, and I can't say them in English. I don't know why. I have to say Piemonte and Lombardia. They're in mountainous regions. It's a mountainous region of Europe that touches, like you said, France, Switzerland. And what I always think is really interesting is how language in mountainous regions from what I've noticed, I'm not a linguist, but from what I've noticed, it evolves slowly over time because people are more insular when they're living in the mountains. But what's interesting for me is to hear these sounds that share traits. They share traits with French, share traits with German, and with Italian as well. And I think it's really interesting that these languages have had an opportunity to evolve in such a way. What actually stood out to me, and I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but you're saying around in Milan, in Lombardia, their vowels are more nasal. And what strikes me about that is that what century did you say that was? Like 17th,
Around the 1700s.
1700s. So we know around the world that France's influence in like everything fancy and everything upscale, and there was a lot that as an American, I noticed this even in the 1700s here. It was like there was this obsession with France and French culture. So it makes me wonder, and I could be completely wrong, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, and that's fine. We'll move on. But I wonder if Milan being Milan, Milano being Milano, being that capital, being that big city, if there's any French influence on the local language, on the local Lombardia, because where'd that come from?
Yeah, I wonder that too, to be fair. I'll answer to this in a bit, but the U and the Ö sounds are, well, again, there's a huge debate on that, like where do they come from? Probably they have to do with the way that local people changed the way that they spoke Latin. Again, I don't remember exactly, but it was probably if the U was long and you had the stress on it, then it became U. And the same happened with the O or the UO
Mhm.
diphthong, and it became R. So those evolutions are slowly and probably had to do some sort of the pre-Roman languages that were spoken in the area. But again, there's a huge debate about the Celtic influence on modern day Lombard and Piemontese. I don't know. I guess people will have a say, of course. So let's hear it. That is to say too that the literature on these languages there is, and there are like centers of that do study these languages, but um, as they're not recognized, of course, they lack the funds, they lack the importance, if I may, of universities. You will not find a lot of papers published in Italy about these languages, about these big questions as well. But the papers usually that you find, they are more like descriptivists, or they describe a certain area, like in current state. Ironically, you'd find more papers published abroad by foreign universities about these languages too. This is long story short. We do not know where the nasal vowels come from, but
Okay.
you're not wrong in saying that there was an influence of French too, because as you said, French was the popular language back in the day, was the most fashionable choice for aristocracy and upper bourgeoisie. So there was an influence, but more in certain words. So, for example, I guess the words that had to do with high society, the driver, the certain ways of having parties and banquets and all of that sort, like all these as well, philosophical words, all these words that not necessarily everyday people would use.
Mhm.
The French was the sort of target language for these words. And therefore, it may have left an influence too in other parts of speech as well.
Mhm.
What I would say, and what other studies say as well, is that since there was this big influence of French as well, people who were literate and wanted to write about these languages. So this is an age as well where the first dictionaries from Milanese to Italian were written, or etymological lexicons about these languages were written too. these people, as soon as they saw something that was similar to French, they were like, "Oh yeah, this word comes from
Mm,
French," because it
mm-hmm.
felt make them feel more noble
I
or
see.
better, say the language.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas probably it developed in a sort of similar way. So if we look at Occitan, which is the language spoken in southern France, it shares a lot of similarities too with Piemontese and Lombard for certain words.
Yeah. Very cool. I love how much history there is in language. And it's always so fascinating to go back and understand or try to understand or theorize about where certain places and where certain parts of history where the changes started to happen. You talked to me about Lombard and Lombardo, and we were talking earlier, and you told me that there were some rivalries that were going on among speakers of the language. And now that I know that there's no standard variety, I have a clue at what's going on. But tell us a bit about these rivalries. And I don't know if that's too strong of a word, but about the what are the things that speakers of Lombardo are differing on?
Definitely. This comes down to history once again. There are these theories. If we look back in the day at Piedmont, that was a sort of unified state, or at least it was under one sovereign that before was a duke and then he became king. So it had a court, and at court they spoke Piemontese and French, and some people Italian too. So the first king of Italy was speaking Piemontese to his troops, to the people of court when he didn't want to be understood by others. And so the first prime ministers of Italy and before Italy happened as well. Whereas in Lombardy, well, it was more complicated, of course. So as I mentioned, Lombard is spoken in nowadays Switzerland too. So we had these divisions. So the north of this speaking area was under control of the Swiss cantons. The western part of the region was the once famous and glorious Duchy of Milan, that
Mhm.
being conquered by Spain, and then it got passed to Austria. Whereas the eastern part, it was all conquered by the Republic of Venice in the Renaissance, and basically until the unification of Italy, there was a border basically between Milan and Eastern Lombardy.
Okay.
That created, of course, a linguistic division because the languages developed bit separately and also with different influences. Again, I'm not an expert of the Eastern varieties, but
Mhm.
for sure I know that the easternmost you go, the U and the Ö sound tend to disappear. Certain words are not used and instead they use others. I think that the verbs as well are different. So for example, in the West, the first conjugation is cantar, laura, whereas in the East, they do cantar. So they
Okay.
say the final R. So again, in the West, they drop the R, whereas they kept the R. Back to the question. So what it means for nowadays speakers, what it means for nowadays Lombard. There is no sense of unity of the language. So
Okay.
people perceive their own variety as a standalone dialect in
Mm,
the sea of dialects.
okay.
Of course, that will mean an average person from Brescia or from Bergamo in the eastern part of the region,
Mhm.
if they don't know about the existence of Lombard language, they would say, "Oh, I speak Bergamasco, I speak Bresciano," and that has nothing to do with
Oh,
Milanese.
okay.
And at the same time, Milan being the economic powerhouse that it was, has been, of course, there's a bit of a prejudice against that variety because, of course, it was the variety spoken by most people, or at least published a lot with a lot of works of poetry, of theater, and so on written in it. Yeah, there is a sense of attack, I would say. So this smaller dialects, the smaller amount of speakers
Mhm.
they used to speak it. They felt to be attacked by this. They basically didn't want Milan to be the standard variety of Lombard.
Right.
They
Okay.
wanted to keep their own. And what does it translate to for an average speaker? Again, what I mentioned at the start of our conversation. So if I had to go to Bergamo and try to speak the way that my mom speaks, they will look me down.
Mhm.
And the same would happen in the southern part of the region because that happened when I was at school too. Like some kids would speak their variety and I would try to speak mine and they would be like, oh, why are you speaking like that? For example, main difference in the south, the known, it's no, whereas my mom would say nia because it comes from nicam, Latin nicam, which is the crumble of bread.
Yes.
That is a very fascinating part. For example, Famienshi would be don't do like that, as my mom would say, but in Lodi, where I went to school, they would say Fanoinshi.
Mhm. Okay.
So just for these little differences, your variety instantly is perceived as foreign, as something else.
Do you notice or do you feel like um we have the number, we have the statistic, the data is there, people are self-reporting and that's what they're doing. What do you personally notice about the trends of people using it more, people using it less? What are the attitudes that you've noticed that people have toward preservation or maybe adopting Italian and saying forget about it? What are the attitudes that you personally are hearing from people?
Yeah, I would be thank you for this. I would be optimistic. I would consider myself usually I don't consider myself an optimist, but I would in this occasion because I think that we are past the curve of renouncing these languages. That
Mhm,
is to say, I think that the Gen X or the baby boomer generations were last ones that would actively say, oh, do not speak these languages because you would not go far in your life if you speak these languages, speak Italian instead. That mindset still survives nowadays, but I think that at least with my generation and the point that us millennials came in our 30s now, basically, I see a return to these origins. Whereas when we were young, we wanted to be cosmopolitan. I think that's the
mm,
word in English.
mhm,
So we wanted to explore the world of Europe or at least Italy. Like we didn't want to be confined within our local world.
right,
Now there is a sort of return to these origins, to like traditions. And of course, it doesn't mean that we are becoming like trad people. But what I observed is that there is a sense of getting tired of certain dynamics that we
mhm,
find in bigger cities. And we tend to look up to what we've left or what we grew up with in continental Europe, especially in Southern Europe, when we lack the facilities for daycare. Grandparents, they play a vital role in children's education. Basically, at least each of us has at least one grandparent who would speak to them in their language. And usually the grandparents from the 1910s to 1930s generation, their their mother tongue would be a dialect. So like
mhm.
in this case of these languages that we speak of today would be Lombard or Piemontese. And that was, for example, the case of my grandmother, my mom's side.
That's a great observation that we had our grandparents to help raise us, and now I don't even wanna get into it because childcare is expensive all over the world, and it's not that grandparents should be free labor. There's wisdom that you get from your grandparents, and there's so much a different set of skills you can get from your grandparents and you can get from your parents. So it's really nice to see that it's nice to hear that there's a return. As you were talking, I was wondering as we're moving through these regions, especially as an outsider, I'm putting myself in this situation because it's Italy. if an American person is going from Torino to Milano to Brescia, and maybe it's a road trip. So we're going between these two regions and specifically saying the big cities because that's where we can fly to easily. And then we're going to drive around. Is it possible for an outsider or somebody who's not from that region to see the written languages anywhere? Are they in newspapers? Are they in magazines or restaurant menus or billboards or anything like that? Do we have, how can we touch the language?
Yes, it would be possible with some variations. And sadly, I became a big sad on my face when you mentioned magazine or newspaper because that would not be possible, generally speaking. Maybe in some areas you would have the local newspaper publishing usually a poem every 2 weeks written in
Okay.
that language. They would have a
Okay.
sort of in-house poet that
Mhm.
would write poems in those languages, and usually these poems they indulge a bit too much about the good old days and so on.
Mhm.
But that would be the only trace in newspapers. Whereas walking around cities, you would find these languages in big cities such as Turin. You would have there are restaurant names. That's what I can think of. All names of bars, and so they are in these languages. So, for example, there is one called Ampiaz, which means mi piace, I like. Yes. And I found it just walking out. Oh, do you know what that means? And the other person was like, no. But also, I think that some years ago, there was this initiative of writing the names of the shops, like what they are. For example, macellaio, there was like a sort of panel, like outside, that would say macellaio, then butchers, and then masle in Piemontese. And I think there was German included or French maybe. And for example, Penoira, which is the hairdresser, like you would find in some parts of Turin. In Milan, you would not find it there in that way, as in these shop panels. I only found them in Turin, but you would still find some places, especially restaurants and bars. Nowadays, as I mentioned before as well, with this new wave of, I guess it's mostly due to young business owners. They want to promote the use of these languages, at least in the name, to make it, even though they opened the business maybe 2 years ago, they want to make it more authentic and
Yeah.
old
Mhm.
and traditional. So they would use this language. And generally speaking as well, I found this a lot in Sicily too. You would find a lot of restaurant and bar names and shop names, their name being Sicilian.
Mhm.
And the same is happening in the north of Italy too. And I'm glad about it because at least this
Yeah.
is one way of language to survive.
Right.
And also people would know, as I said, they would have the same awareness, but mostly competency
Mhm.
of the language that I have. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Do we see
oh,
graffiti
graffiti.
in either of those languages? And I'm asking you because when you mentioned Sicily, I thought when I went to Sicily, I didn't see the only place I saw Sicilian was, like you said, restaurant and bar names. But there were a few streets I'd walk down and there would be graffiti in Sicilian. And there was one poem that was graffitied onto a wall and it was in Sicilian. I still have the picture on my phone because I didn't know what it meant. And I said, one day I'm gonna find a Sicilian speaker who can tell me what this means. But I think graffiti is such a way of countering political action and countering the status quo. So I wonder, do you ever see graffiti in either of those languages anywhere?
Maybe not. So, no, not that I can think.
Mhm.
But again, maybe in the eastern part of Lombardy, there are. Maybe in the eastern
Okay.
part of Piemonte, there are. That I can think of in Turin or in Susa, where I live now. I did not find this.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Do we need to encourage people to go out and deface public property to help save these languages?
Well, usually graffitis are like some person, I love you.
Mm.
They could write this love in these local languages for
Yeah.
sure.
Let's Let's not get anybody in trouble, but if
No,
anyone wants to
a suggestion out
this
there
is
for the world,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. So are we feeling optimistic? Are we feeling optimistic about the future of these two languages?
That's a maybe a gray area question.
Okay.
I don't know. I wonder it myself too, because as you introduced nicely, I've dedicated part of my life to these initiatives. So I feel like I have a duty to be optimistic because otherwise I would just give it up everything. I would just resign and I don't know, live another life. But I think I'm optimistic in the way that we have a huge opportunity that is represented by social media, by internet as a whole, by the fact as well that your podcast is highlighting so many languages that in mainstream media you would not find it. You only find them in a very folkloristic, comedic, cringy way.
Mm.
Whereas you talk to speakers and you give them the opportunity to speak about these languages and to let the world know. So in the same way, we have this opportunity to know more. What I saw as well is that young people in Italy, they do not watch the news on TV.
Mm.
And I understand why, to be fair, but they tend to keep themselves updated through social media. We have a lot of important media outlets that are only on social media. And usually they focus on certain things. They speak about many aspects of life. And from time to time, but more often, I've seen recently, they used or they speak about languages. They speak about dialects. They are
Yeah.
like comparing dialects, or maybe they are even Babbel, for example. It's making a lot of reels about this comparison between them. And maybe sometimes, I guess, it's hard to speak about them in a way that is perceived as correct by not by the speakers themselves, but by the speakers who are aware that these are completely different languages than Italian, but they try. And again, I'm not too hard on them because it's hard to find good sources and
Yeah.
good sources that are not influenced by certain ways of thinking. So I'm rather optimistic for the future. But then again, sometimes I read the comments and there are like people from 2005 that says, why are we still speaking about these dialects? They should have died, or languages do die. It's natural. And but again, I'm thinking they're young. Maybe they will change their mind eventually too. What I would like to see, maybe this was not the question, sorry. What I would like to see is these languages being used more naturally. I'm a bit jealous about other linguistic environments in Europe. First of all, Catalonia, but also Austria is another example. They have a lot of creators who just are book talkers, they cook, they do makeup, they do any kind of thing that you would find in mainstream languages, and they do them in Galician. And I would love to find this about this, about
Yeah.
Lombard, and I would follow them. There is a chef that does all the recipes in Lombard, and of course I follow him. What I would like to see is this, like to have the freedom to use the language, but I also understand why they don't, because the majority of comments, the reaction that they would find is very harsh and it's not easy to take. Maybe some people just prefer to write it. Maybe some people just prefer to write the same things that you would nowadays, luckily, you would find all over the internet, such as how to write this language or the common words and so on, rather than just creating original content in those languages. So I think that would be the nice jump from the current status to something a bit more, is to create languages. But there is a bit of a hope too in the music sector. Not about how Piemontese that much. There is one that does, I think is people or rap. I'm not too good in defining musical genres, but there are two youngish authors in Lombard. They do rap in their variety. And this is a feature that I didn't say about these languages, but you may have noticed, or what I said is that they tend to have a lot of truncated words.
Mm.
So words that just are either monosyllabic or they just end with a consonant. For rap music, it's amazing. Like you basically can adapt any tune that exists into these languages because they have all these truncated words. Yeah, it's a bit like, as I said, of a gray area, but there may be some reasons to be optimistic in the
Yeah.
future.
Okay. Let's be optimistic then.
Let's be, yes.
I know we're running out of time, but I would love to know about some things that are celebrated in these regions. Any festive things or festivities that go on in Lombardia or in Piemonte, things that people love and look forward to every year. Tell us about some of those things.
I would say there are three main things that they're like a collective thing that you would find initiatives about these languages, maybe either being used, I don't know, for a show or like in the programs being written down, something. The first one will be Carnival. Usually is around February. And for example, of course, the examples I know of is the examples I've been to. There are more. So in Piemonte, we have a traditional one in Ivrea, which is a city in between Turin and the Aosta Valley. And they have a traditional carnival where they throw oranges at each other. And it hurts. I've been there last year. And you're only safe if you wear a red beret, like a red hat. Yes. At the moment you take it off and you are in the red area, basically you're like receiving oranges, but you're able to throw oranges too.
Okay.
Also, there are like some sort of gray areas too, where you can throw oranges basically you can always throw oranges at the people on the chariots.
Okay.
And the people on the chariots can only throw them to you, but slowly, because they have the advantage. They could shoot far and hurt a lot of people. So they tend not to because they represent the city's guilds and
What is this one called?
neighborhoods. Ivrea.
Ivrea is the name of the
Ivrea
is the name of the
is of
orange
the city,
throwing?
yes.
Okay.
Carnival of Ivrea,
Okay.
yes. And the thing, of course, is called the Battaglia degli Aranci, I think
Okay.
Battaglia di Portugal. Because again, fun fact, in Lombard and Piemontese, the word for orange is the same as Portugal. So you would say Portugal
Portugal.
because the first oranges, I think they came with a Portuguese ship or something connected to that
Oh my god.
trade. Yeah. But also, for example, in Turin, less fascinating, but you would have the local costume, who's called Gianduia. And he speaks Piemontese. He would speak in the public square Piemontese. And usually in all these carnivals, you would have a couple of young people. Usually they were elected the most handsome, the most beautiful boy and girl of young age. And there would be, instead of having semester something, you would have these as for one day and they are dressed in traditional 1800s costumes and just parade the city.
Okay.
And they usually have names in those languages. So, for example, in my mom's town, very small carnival, but every year they would they still do a, a stall where they would sell polenta and shuriui.
Mhm.
Shuriui is sausages. And
Oh.
this was a way as well to give food to the poor people because
Mhm.
like a poor person would go there and they would be served polenta and shuri. Whereas nowadays, of course, it's not that cheap because it helps to pay towards the organization of such festivals. So of
Mhm.
course times change, but
Yeah.
once it was for that region and again in Domodossola where my mom comes from, you would have two young people being elected and their traditional names are Antonio, which means Anthony, and Lucia, which I think means Lucia.
Okay.
In Lombardy, I don't think it's Carnival, definitely, but also I think is the patron saints throughout. Of course, in Piemonte too. Like in Turin, we have St. John in the summer. They do a big bonfire, yes, and they
Mhm.
basically they set light to a bull, and whereas the bull falls, it means that the year will be good or bad for the city. And they always make it fall on the good side. It's like, unless there is like a strong wind or something, it would fall on the bad
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to keep these traditions alive. Whereas in Milan, we have Sant'Ambrose, which is in on the 7th of December. So it's the first day of festivities. People would make their Christmas decorations on that day. If you do them before, you're now local, basically. We don't do that here, that kind of stuff. So on the 7th of December, you can put up your Christmas tree, but not before, or do your nativity scene or whatever you like.
Mhm.
And there is a traditional antique market called Bay, which was basically, they say at least, that the name comes from vendors shouting, I've got beautiful things.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So there's like a huge antique market, and that's like a tradition. The third sort of festivals I was talking about, they are called the Sagre. And I don't know if, listeners would be familiar to them, but how to describe them. Usually they fill a gap of events from May to September when the weather is hot and people may not be able to travel outside of the region. They have
Mhm.
to spend the summer there. And usually, again, I'm summing them up badly, but usually they have a theme. So, and the theme usually is food. So there can be a Sagra del Fungo. So like a mushroom festival or bell pepper festival, onion festival, blackberry festival, blueberry festival. And so you would find them, like you would pay, you have food, you don't pay the entrance, but you go in, you pay and you get the food. Usually they have a sort of disco area where young people would dance, but also more importantly, they would have a dance hall. In our language is called da, and there they would dance what is called the liscio. And the liscio consists of three traditional dances that comes from, not necessarily, but they come from the Austrian and Hungary influence. They are mazurka, polka, and waltz.
Oh,
This is the third one.
okay. How cool is that? And I love a food festival too. Like mushroom festival?
Mhm.
Okay. Italy just gets more points every time I
Mhm.
talk about it. It's just it's better and better. I want to ask you about De Vulgare. I want you to please tell our audience what you do and let our audience know where we can find you and how we're able to support your work.
Oh, thank you. So the Vulgare was born, I think, 3 years ago now, almost four. And at first, the aim was not very simple, but was one aim. So we wanted to build
Mhm.
a digital library of voice recordings in the minoritized languages of Italy. It's a crowdsourcing kind of thing.
Mhm.
Anyone is able to contribute to this and just fill out a form, give out privacy consent and so on, and send the voice recording. And we will publish on this website. And at the same time, to promote this initiative, we opened our social media channels and we just started slowly to promote this and so on. But then we realized that we wanted to fill a gap, um, that is to talk about these languages in a way that we didn't feel too satisfied about. So we
Mhm.
wanted to, it would sound very simple and pick me, but we wanted to make them sound cool. We wanted to make them appealing to a wider audience too. And we want to use them to talk about current days affairs, to what's on the news, what's popular, what's the meme of the moment, not
Yeah.
just about old traditions or long debates about how you should write that vowel sound and so on.
Mhm.
We do not do that, actually. We just ignore all of that, and instead we focus on how to talk about environmental issues in those languages, how to talk about LGBTQ rights in those languages, how to talk about mental health and disability, and so on. And we became a non-profit organization under the Italian law. Yes. And it's been, I think, the third year, or we are
Mhm.
entering our third year of that.
Mhm.
We have a website that is under construction because it was one of our aims. It was to improve our website. The library at the moment is not in the new website, but you can still find it in the old one. The new website is www.vulgare.com. And our main social media is on Instagram, who is _Vulgare. And there you would find the link in bio with all the links basically to other things. We're on Facebook too, and recently on Blue Sky, using it from time to time, not always. Yes.
That's perfect. I will add the links to your
Thank
platforms
you.
in the show notes for this episode so that people can click and get in touch with you and keep following you, keep in touch with what you're doing right away.
Thank you.
Oh, you are so welcome. I think that you guys are doing a terrific job. I think that your work is really powerful and it's really important work. Cheers and congratulations. And into your third year. This is amazing. And I wish you many more.
Thank you. Thank you.
Guglielmo, thank you so much for this conversation. I've had so much fun learning from you and talking to you about these regions of Italy.
Thank you so much, El, for having me.
I think one day we're going to have as many Italian languages on this show as possible. So thank you for contributing to this and sharing your story, sharing your voice and your languages with all of us. I like to end each episode with the same question just to have a little bit of fun. I end every episode on this question. Do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Lombardo or in Piemontese to share and to teach us?
I
Okay.
do actually. So in the Lombard, we have these sounds like piuttosto che una goccia, le mei piuttosto, which would translate in English with rather than nothing, it's better rather. What does it mean? It means that rather than have nothing, you would have to be happy with the little that you've got already.
Okay. Okay.
Don't dream too far. Maybe I'm like, I don't know, I'm expanding on it, but I think it's like stay put with happy with what you've got, do not complain, that kind
Right.
of stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas I've got two tongue twisters, and I'm sure you will have fun repeating them.
Okay.
This one goes, tikete taketi tak, takomi takami, ni takat noi takati, taketi pito tak, tikete takita. Yes. And I said it very slowly, like good speakers, they would actually say it very fast. So what it means is that you stick heels, stick the heels to me. I do not have to be the one to stick the heels to you. Stick the heels yourself. Stick your heels yourself. You stick the heels.
Okay.
Yes. And the other one, this one is a bit more complicated too. So it didn't even refuse to look. Okay, now I've got it. Sorry. Chi calè? Ulla ka la. No, I have to do it again. Chi calè? Ulla ka la ka ta. Ulla ka la casta. Tu cula culina la cala cule culone la.
Okay.
Okay. Again, said it very slowly, but I think it was a service for me, but for everyone probably. So it basically means who is that person who has bought that house that is on that hill over there with those columns. And Again, this is to like usually sayings, proverbs, tongue twisters, they are being overlooked by people who are passionate about the language because they are a way of preserving the language without having to do much work, basically. But they're a great way to talk about these languages too, because, for example, in this one, ki, kale, kula, it shows that basically in Piemontese, but also in Lombard, it's not enough to say this one. You have to say all the time, this one there, this one over
Mm,
there. Like
mhm.
you always have to say kuski, kuzula, and basically it's the most common way to say that. Yes.
Yeah.
And before with tak, again, it was the te part, the adverb, not the adverb, sorry, the pronoun, the verbal
Mhm.
pronoun was repeated throughout, and that it will makes it difficult to say because you just repeat te a lot and so on.
So you gave me 4 answers to that.
You know what? Let me do the tikete takita.
Okay. Let's go a
I
little
can
at
do
a
that.
time, and I'll repeat after you.
Okay, okay. Good to have a conversation so we can do second. Perfect. Ke, okay.
Tike, titake,
Takum,
itak. Takum,
takum, itak, mi,
takum, itak, uh,
mi,
me.
mi, takat, mia,
Mi takat, mia,
itak, ati.
itak, ati.
Taketi, ti,
Ta- take, wait, take, ti.
kateti, ti,
Wait, take, ti,
itotak,
i, to, tak.
ti, ketetak,
I.
ti, kete, just
Wait.
stay there, ti, kete, sorry,
Wait, so yeah, take, ti, I, to, tak. And then after that, we have
after that, ti, kete,
tike, te,
taket,
taket,
itak.
itak. Okay, that's it.
Do you want to try?
Okay. Tike, te, taket, itak. Takum, itak, ami. Mitakat, mia, itak, ati. Take, ti, itotak. Tike, te, taket, itak.
Perfect, well done.
Wow, I did
I
it.
struggle with that every day. Like for sure, I don't remember like a day or a TV or a photo. And
And this is Piemontese.
oh no, this is Lombard.
This is Lombard. Okay, let me
Mhm.
just Lombard.
So if you go to Milan or another town and you say this, they will
They'll
be impressed. They
they'll
will be
be
like, "Oh
I
wow, you know about us." Yeah.
I love it. My first sentence is in Lombardo, and I thank you for teaching them to me, to us, to the audience by extension. Guglielmo, thank you so much again for this conversation. Before I let you go, since we ended on Lombardo, if you're in Lombardy and you are saying goodbye to someone that you've been speaking to for quite a while, what is the best way in the language to say goodbye?
I think, yeah, okay. So in let's say in general Western Lombardy, you would say "as vedem,"
Asvedem.
which means we will see each other.
Mhm.
We see each other. Where my mom comes from, of course, there is a little bit tweak in the ending of the verb, so they would say "as veduma."
Asveduma. That feels nice to say. Asveduma,
"As
Guglielmo.
veduma."
Thank you so much again, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like ourselves. Ciao!